Between now and July the 23rd, the winner will have picked his way across 2,023 torturous miles. 198 riders start today. It'll be nothing like that number on the Champs-Élysées when we finish in 3 weeks' time. In keeping with recent tradition, the start goes outside France, Luxembourg this time, one of the most picturesque cities in Europe. Well, the Duchy has forked out £1.3 million to host the start. It'll be looking for and getting a decent return on that figure. The commercialisation of the tour is second to none now in Europe. The riders reaping the benefit. There's £800,000 up for grabs this year in total prize money. Well, the riders start today's 5-mile prologue on the Avenue de la Liberté, and that's where we find Phil Liggett. Somebody mentioned to me today that this was his 70th tour. Could that be? Phil, it's nice to see you.
Well, thank you, Richard. And I must say, in 1975, after my second Tour de France, I swore I'd never come back, because it really is quite a chore for the journalists as well. But here I am, 17 years on, a little bit greyer. Well, as you say, the Tour de France starting here in Luxembourg for the first time. That's going to be the policy now of the Tour de France, to start on foreign soil, if they can, every other year. The prologue, by the way, will start from the start house in just a few minutes' time. The first rider in will be Peter Peters, the former Dutch champion. He'll set off this year's race. The last man to go, of course, the man who won it last year, Pedro Delgado. Well, before we go to the Tour de France itself this year, a lot has happened since we were on our screens a year ago. Let's have a look back now at one or two incidents, not least the big battle in the World Championship in Belgium last September. A battle which turned out between three men, Fondries of Italy, who went on to win the world title, and the shunt behind that took place between Croker Killion of Belgium, the great favourite, and Steve Bauer of Canada. Now, this crash, by the way, has led now to the courts, and it's still going on. And needless to say, Killian and Bauer are bitter rivals as well, and they're both here in the Tour de France. A great sadness for us, certainly, is the fact that Malcolm Elliott from Sheffield will not be in this year's Tour de France. His Teca team, which he joined this year, did not make the cut. And that's a shame, because Malcolm Elliott in this year's Tour of Spain not only won 2 stages, but he also ran out the points winner of the race, and that was a first for Great Britain. Well, the loss to the organisation of the Tour de France is a gain to Channel 4, because he'll join you in the studio tomorrow, and he'll be in and out over the next 3 weeks. His comments, I know, will be extremely valued. There's been a lot of people change teams this year, including the British riders, Sean Yates and Robert Miller. But one man who hasn't is alongside me now, and he's Paul Sherwin, a veteran of 7 Tours de France. Welcome back again, Paul. Let's talk about the 2 British riders. First of all, Robert Miller. What's his chances?
Well, Robert's name is actually on the tongues of quite a lot of the Continental team managers this year. I know we've said in the past that Robert is the English rider who can win the Tour, but the thing is, this year Robert's had the ideal preparation. He hasn't ridden a major Tour beforehand. He hasn't ridden the Tour of Spain. He hasn't ridden the Tour of Italy. He's ridden just the French races, which are the ideal way to prepare for Robert, because he's not quite as strong as some of the other riders. So he should be coming to the Tour in the best possible position.
Do you think he can actually not only repeat his 1984 victory in the King of the Mountains, but challenge for the final yellow jersey?
It depends on his mentality. He seems to be a lot more calm amongst the Ver.Ⅷ team that he's joined now. He seems to be more relaxed, and that's probably what's going to help him. And if his team manager, Ver.Ⅷ can bring him up to putting in a big performance, well then Robert could find himself, if he gets to the mountains in a good situation, actually vying for the yellow jersey.
That'd be absolutely marvellous. Now, what about that super domestic and a great mate of yours, Sean Yates, who's now on the American 7-11 squad?
Well, if Andy Hampson's going for the yellow jersey, I can see Sean Yates being a big ally for him. Sean will be able to look after him on the flat stages, but because of the politics in the 7-11 teams, it means Sean will have a lot more freedom than he's had in the past to try and win some of the flatter stages before we get to the mountains. And I'm sure that, although he's had a lot of bad luck this year in the Tour of Italy where he crashed over a black cat, I think that he's got over those. I've heard reports from Belgium that now he's absolutely stomping, just to use his own words, so I think we'll see him in the early part of the Tour.
I bet we will. Well, Paul, of course, alongside me, my chauffeur extraordinaire for the next 3 weeks, and he will be a valued assistance all the way around the Route de France. Well, Paul and I have had a little discussion about the men we think will challenge. Now let's have a look at them. Spain waited 15 years for Pedro Delgado to put them back on the winning trail a year ago. And for the first time since 1986, a previous year's Tour de France champion will be back to try and defend his title. The man from Segovia is ready to prove he's no dope and has already won the Tour of Spain this year. And by the way, he's passed all of the anti-stimulant controls. Undoubtedly the man to beat, and Pedro knows he's the form to do it again. In 1987, Stephen Roche was the toast of Ireland, the first sportsman to be given the freedom of the city of Dublin. He put his name alongside the Pope and the late President Kennedy. Then disaster, and the world champion and winner of the Tours of Italy and France was out for more than a year with injury. The skeptics were soon in action, but Roche never lost sight of his target, to come back and race again. "I don't care what I win, I just want to win again," he told me this year. Laurent Fignon is loved to be hated by the French press, and as soon as he loses, he's either too old, played out, or simply a playboy. But the double winner of the Tour de France, if the truth be known, has been either ill or injured ever since his second win in 1984. Last year, before he retired from the Tour, he had a parting shot for the press with his drinking bottle. But 2 weeks ago, his legs gave them the story they've been waiting for. He won the Tour of Italy for the first time, and now he must be a clear favourite for the double. Last year, Steve Bauer from Canada opened with a stage win, and twice wore the leader's yellow jersey. It inspired him to a great finish, and although he lost the Tour of course, he finished a magnificent fourth and has the form to challenge again this time around. For the first time since 1984, Sean Kelly cannot be introduced as the world's #1 rider. He lost that title to Charlie Motte this spring, but he's still the great favourite of all those who know him. A serious man from Carrick-on-Shore, I don't think can ever win the Tour, but his great win in the Liège-Bastogne-Liège Classic this year still leaves room for hope. In any case, the Tour would not be the same without Sean, and many will cheer him to a high finish just because his name's Kelly. The quiet man of world cycling is Robert Miller, and the Tour de France has been a watershed for him ever since he finished fourth and became the only Briton to win the King of the Mountains title in 1984. Now Miller has returned to the Peugeot team with whom he celebrated those early successes. Miller has proved too often he can't ride two major tours in the same year, and he's purposely missed the Tours of Spain and Italy this season. The result, he's racing better than ever before with the second and third in smaller stage races. Perhaps he'll have already forgotten what he told us last year.
I don't really like the Tour de France that much anymore. Maybe I'm getting too old for it.
Charlie Motte has had 4 shots at the Tour de France, the best of 4th in 1987. He's also led the race, but last year he gave up in the Pyrenees. Now he is the world's #1, or at least so the computer says. But certainly he's ready for the race with a win in the warm-up Dauphiné event in France, where Miller has come second. He changed his team this year as well, and quite frankly, he's never looked better. The gangly figure of Dutchman Steven Rooks is not the prettiest of sights, but he's wonderfully effective when he's climbing. First rider from the low country to win the mountains title last year, Rooks scored a great stage win also on top of Alpe d'Huez. His second place overall was deserved, even if it was something of a surprise. His results are less emphatic this year, and maybe with the Tour in mind, who knows. Throughout the 80s, the Americans have enjoyed a great deal of success, including a first victory by Greg LeMond in 1986. Although LeMond is back for the first time since then, realistically, hopes probably lie with 27-year-old Andy Hampsten. Andy finished 4th the year LeMond won, and 16th and 15th since. Third in the recent Tour of Italy, a race he won last year, he's ready now to move up into the Tour de France and take on all comers. He'll have Englishman Sean Yates on his team too, and that'll be a help. So we come to our 2 old amigos from South America, and Fabio Parra, 3rd last year and 2nd in this year's Tour of Spain behind Delgado, is in frightening form. He's ridden the race 4 times and never finished worse than 8th, which was in 1985. And perhaps he'll remember well his climb of Alpe d'Huez last year, when his attacks were blocked by the photographers. He was somewhat lucky to ride this year, as his team was only given a place as one of the 4 wild cards. And then there's Luis Herrera, Parra's ex-teammate, who is the more fashionable perhaps of the 2 riders. Herrera has just won 2 stages in the Tour of Italy and will enjoy the Pyrenees and the hard section through the Alps especially. He's acutely aware that the first Colombian to win the Tour de France will receive his nation's greatest honours. and surely that victory cannot be far away now from one of these two. Well, there's 11 names to conjure with. Now you can pick your 3. I'm going to go for a win for Delgado for the second time in as many years. In second place, Andy Hampsten, the American, and in third slot, Laurent Fignon of France. Paul Sherwin has selected Delgado as well. He's going to go for Fignon finishing second, and the Colombian Fabro Parra in third place. Now, Richard, what about you?
Well, for what it matters, Phil, Keys is also on Delgado to win it. I've got Rooks in second place, and Roach, if he steers clear of injury, in third place. Anguished long and hard about it. It's difficult to rule out Parra and Fignon at the rest, but I'd like to see Roach in the frame. The bookies, incidentally, all agree on Delgado to win it. These prices from A.R. Dennis: evens Delgado, 4-1 Roach and Fignon, 7 Parra, 12-1 Hampsten, 16 Rooks, 20s Zimmerman and Bröking, the rest 33s or better. Well, in a moment we're going to be taking our first look at action from this year's race, the prologue time trial.
Or maybe to persevere. To cross the countryside, scale the mountains, and become part of a country as 30 million come out to watch. To never say it's just a shirt and beg your body to let you wear it just once. Beginning today, be part of 76 years of history. Ride the streets of legend in the Tour de France. And in the end, maybe, just maybe, be the one. It is a colorful thread that annually weaves the country of France together, including in odd years a start outside the borders of the country, from the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, north through the Ardennes Forest and Belgium. A plane ride on the day off to the Brittany coast, across the rolling hills of the wine country to the grueling Pyrenees, and the first big test along the Spanish border. To Marseille on Bastille Day, into the Alps then for the gut-checking climbs and fear-testing descents that usually decide the race. A high-speed train ride will bring the cyclists, those who are left, to Paris. And after 23 days, 21 stages of racing covering 2,031 miles, the Tour will end. In terms of distance and terrain, it resembles a journey to Los Angeles from Chicago, over the Rockies and the Sierra Nevadas, except with decades of history and glory to enrich the trip. Good afternoon. I'm Al Troutwick reporting from l'Avenue de la Liberté in Luxembourg. Behind me, the crowd is assembling and preparations are being made for the start of the 1989 Tour de France. 198 cyclists who will be the eventual stars over the next 4 weekends in our coverage of the Tour here on ABC. Along the way, we'll visit some of the most enchanting locations in Europe and delve into the colorful, complicated, and high-tech world of professional cycling. Well, how does someone win? Well, along the way, every cyclist's time is recorded, and the one who reaches Paris after 21 stages with the shortest elapsed time will be the eventual champion. Now, the Tour begins today with a ceremonial 5-mile individual time trial, a prologue that counts. At the end of the day, the yellow jersey will be awarded, as it will throughout the Tour, and that's how we'll recognize the leader. That will be the first hero today. Now, this Tour has had many heroes in the past. Some of them have been Americans. Sam Posey has more on that.
Because the United States has shared so much with France through the years, it may seem something of a surprise that it wasn't until 1980 that an American even entered the Tour de France. His name was Jonathan Boyer. He finished 32nd in a field of 130, but he really started something because just 6 years later, another American, curiously with a French-sounding name, Greg LeMond, actually won the Tour de France. And today, with the event about to get underway, Andy Hampsten of Boulder, Colorado, is talked about as one of the hot favorites. LeMond and Hampsten. When the story of American success in France's greatest sporting event is told, these two men are at the center of it. A reality of pro cycling is that in order to win the Tour de France, you have to be part of the European cycling fraternity, which means living in Europe full-time. Greg LeMond was the first American rider willing to do this. His commitment and natural ability earned him a spot on the team of five-time Tour winner Ver.Ⅷ And soon, comparing himself with Hinault, Lamond realized he himself had what it took to win. The moment came in 1986 when Lamond defeated Hinault in a tension-filled battle that saw all of France united in support of Hinault, while Lamond looked for help from his young American teammate Andy Hampsten. Following Lamond's historic victory, he and Hampsten went very separate ways. Lamond went to the hospital. He was shot by his brother-in-law in a hunting accident that shattered his career, and from which he has not fully recovered. While Andy Hampsten went to a young team, 7-Eleven, which has been maturing rapidly. This is Andy winning the Tour of Italy last year. It was the first ever victory in a European stage race by an American team. Today, Greg LeMond races in his first Tour de France since he won it in '86. It's strange, he says, to be back, realizing he can't win.
What I'd like to do is start the Tour de France with hope of finishing it, and finishing it strong. And if I can place in the top 10, I'd be very satisfied this year.
Andy Hampsten and the 7-Eleven team have spent the days prior to the Tour training near their European base in Switzerland. Morale is high.
We're here to win the race, and we know enough about racing not to make too many plans. So right now there's nothing holding us back. It'll be a real competitive race, which is good for us.
Americans at the Tour de France, Lamond, the realist, and Hampsten, a strong favorite, brimming with optimism.
Liniment for the muscles, oil for the bike, all in preparation for the critical stages that lie ahead. France, starting in the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. Well, this small country, actually smaller than the state of Rhode Island, campaigned heavily for the honor. And such is the current tradition of the Tour, dating back to 1954 when they first ventured outside the borders of France to Amsterdam to begin the race. And now there is talk that French-speaking Quebec, Canada will receive the honor in a couple of years. 80 years ago, a man from this place became the first foreigner to figure out the subtleties and win France's race. Today, you must master those same subtleties to win. Explaining some of them is British cycling journalist Phil Liggett.
Well, the strategy department of the Tour de France is based on tradition as well. And the first thing to remember is the race lasts more than 3 weeks. So if you waste your energy early on, you may have nothing left for the big push to Paris in the final week. The man who wins the Tour de France has covered the route in the fastest possible time, each day's time being added to the next. Now, in the Tour de France, consistency is the key word. The winner may never win any of the daily stages, but he will always finish at or near the front. He'll choose certain days in which to win the race. He'll choose the individual time trial and the high mountains where he can use the strength he was born with. The lesser men will try to win the stages, and occasionally they might even lead the race. But in tradition, they will always be the pretenders of the race. The prologue route, the hors d'oeuvre to the race, winds its way around the city of Luxembourg for 5 miles. And in recent years, the Tour de France has given the host city the chance to show the public this great race close up. Today's winner in this early test against the clock will never decide the final winner of the Tour de France. But those who want to succeed know they must do well. Some have come, though, just for a taste of early fame. After leaving Luxembourg and crossing Belgium, the first real test comes on stage 5, a 45 miles time trial from the Brittany coastal town of Dinard to Rennes. Laurent Fignon, the French #1 hope, must stake a claim here, while Irishman Stephen Roach will want to prove that injury has finally left the 1987 winner. After the long time trial in northern France, by next weekend, interest moves further south to the Pyrenees and the 9th stage from Pau to Cotteret, with the climbs of the Col de Marie Blanc and the Col d'Aubisque. Last year, it was Steve Bauer who opened with a stage win on the first day. And inspired, as so many are, by the Golden Fleece, he became a threat to riders like Delgado and the Colombian Lucho Herrera, whose hilly lands make them natural angels in the mountains. And as this race crosses to the Alps and the final battleground, a stage of 100 miles between Briançon and Alpe d'Huez on stage 17 makes a 4th cruel day in the Alps. After 2 mountain passes, this final ascent rises from the valley floor via 22 hairpin bends to a height of 6,100 feet. And Andy Hampsten has proved he's a climber. and if he arrives here in contention, he'll match the best in these steep slopes. Including Delgado, who's twice taken the yellow jersey here, and the Dutchman Steven Rooks, who has waited just for this race, knowing that for the last 2 years, the riders who have finished second have won in Paris. The last challenge this year comes on the final day, another individual time trial between Versailles and the Champs-Élysées. Can this 15 miles test be as decisive as it was in 1968, when the Dutchman Jan Janssen won the closest race in the history of the Tour by just 38 seconds? So the Champs-Élysées awaits the 76th winner of the event, and in this most international tour for years, Pedro Delgado is still seen as the man to beat.
Of course, Paris is 3 precarious weeks away. And while the handicappers have made their choices as to who might win, we've almost approached the moment where the Tour begins and the guessing ends. That a little bit later on ABC's Wide World of Sports. Right now to famous Bislett Stadium in Oslo, Norway. Here's Marty LaCour. Individual time trials are times of tension, as opposed to most stages of the race when riders are comforted by being surrounded by their teammates. This is Ver.Ⅱ of the Netherlands, experiencing what it is like when you do it alone in the Tour. The prologue course is only 5 miles and about 10 minutes long, but the first yellow jersey will be worn today by the fastest man, and that is an honor that will not be given away. You'll notice that Eric has decided to let his crew cut break the wind, as opposed to a sleek helmet, as riders sometimes opt for comfort over the gain of a couple of seconds. Whatever, it works for him as he takes the lead in a time of 9:54.47. Now to Greg LeMond of the United States and ADR, a Belgian team.
This time trial may be more important to Greg than almost anyone else in the race. He's got to convince himself he's recovered enough from his injuries to be competitive.
To me, now, any victory is a great victory. I'm saying that the real yellow jersey means the final victory, but for me, I would give anything to take the yellow jersey early on, even if I had to give it up to somebody else. I'm here to do well, and if it means doing well on the prologue or the first day or the second day, I'm going to try to do well.
The chemistry is different really this year for Greg. He's not thinking of the whole event, all 3 weeks of it, and trying to ration his energy. He's seeing what he can do right now.
In the most recent major competition, the Giro d'Italia, there was an individual time trial just like this near the end of the race. And while Greg had struggled in the middle, he finished second in that trial, giving him confidence for the Tour.
Well, I feel this is a real test for Le Mans today, and I really believe that Greg is not sure what to expect from himself. His return to the top has been slow but sure. He's building up his muscles and his stamina again. And by the way, real talent, you know, never does go very far away. It's tough to come back, though, especially after injury, and Le Mans has no idea if his body's ready yet to take a full Tour de France. It must be said, he looks good here. He's got a fine style, no rolling of the shoulders, and that's always a sign of fatigue. And for the long-term morale, I think Greg needs to do a very good time today.
This the first appearance by Greg LeMond on the Tour since he won it in 1986. And he is currently in second place. Whatever confidence he hoped to draw from today's prologue is there for him to take. Where Greg LeMond has been before in this event, his old friend, Colorado's Andy Hampsten, wants to go. And he's coming up as the Tour de France continues. Has surprised many. His friend, American Andy Hampsten, at a speed near 30 miles per hour, is negotiating the outskirts of Luxembourg City. His prologue 5-mile ride underway. As he does that, Sam Posey gathers post-prologue thoughts from Greg LeMond.
It's a very good start for me. Usually if I'm in the top 10 in the prologue, I'm going to have a good Tour de France, but still I have no background to go by. I can't say if I'm going to be very good for 3 weeks, but I know I'm going to have some very good days. Now that I've seen this is a very good test because it's longer than the normal prologue and it has a very good hill, so there's no cheating, no faking it in a race like this.
What does today mean for you in the context of the entire tour? Is it significant?
It's significant because it gives me a lot of confidence for the future time trials and even the mountain stages. But I'm still very worried for the mountains. I'm not sure how I'm going to do.
That's a superb ride by Lamond. He's come here for early success, and he's got it. He's among the leaders already. Well done, Greg.
Hampson, the star member of the increasingly successful 7-11 team for this Tour de France, feels he has peaked perfectly. He had the right signals from his body as he finished third in the recent Tour of Italy, and doesn't necessarily look to make big noise in this prologue, rather look forward to the mountains, where his strength should scream out. About 17 seconds back without major error. Easily made up with somewhat of Andy Hampson's talent, considering 2,026 miles or less.
Laurent Fignon, two-time winner of the Tour de France. Notice those unusual oval glasses. They give him kind of a scholarly demeanor. In fact, Fignon is better educated than the average pro rider, having studied veterinarian medicine at the university level. His successes have earned him respect, but somehow the fans have never really had an affinity for Fignon.
That's true, Sam, and he won the Tour, of course, in 1983 and 1984, and that was during the time of the great Frenchman Ver.Ⅷ and he was riding then at his peak. But since then, Fignon's either been sick or injured, and this year he's won the Tour of Italy, and at last he appears to be back.
In that last major moment of glory, the 84 Tour de France, Laurent Fignon won 3 of the 4 individual time trials. He is riding slickly in this discipline again, and Fignon nudges Greg LeMond III, only 6 seconds back of Ⅷ the leader. Ireland's Sean Kelly moves through the first few miles of his 11th Tour de France, and as he does, something is very wrong at the start. For when Kelly departed, the defending champion Pedro Delgado should have been right behind him, but as you can see, he is not.
Delgado is the last man to go, and he knows his assigned slot, and with or without him, the clock will start.
Under this lightning bolt of drama, Ireland's Sean Kelly, almost 5 years ranked #1 in the world, an honor he held until recently, moves toward the finish line. Kelly has never had the winning luck in the Tour. He has finished 7th and 4th and 5th, and 2 years ago was forced to retire from the Tour, and it brought him to tears. That is the passion he holds for this race. That is the ability he hopes to find in his legs. And his third-place finish moves Greg LeMond to 4th. When the tones sound on the start clock in the start house that still awaits Pedro Delgado's time will move forward. If he shows up, he will be behind by however long he is late. The Tour de France is receiving a poke in the eye, for its star and last year's champion Pedro Delgado is late, very late. Now media chaos, enhanced by the hunger for a major story that Pedro Delgado is writing. Pedro Delgado is 2 minutes and 42 seconds behind.
The difference between one top athlete and another is usually more mental than anything, and any great champion, and Delgado is that, knows to put mistakes behind him and salvage what's left of his opportunity. What I think he's got to avoid now is going too hard and compounding his error. More than once before this, Delgado has been the focus of unwanted drama. In fact, the story of this 29-year-old star from Segovia, Spain, is filled with deep emotions and dark clouds of suspicion. In 1986, learning that his mother had died as he raced through the Alps, he withdrew in tears. But the following year, on exactly the same part of the course, he roared into the lead to wear the yellow jersey. Last year, he won the race itself, but the euphoria of his victory was haunted by headlines like these: Delgado and drugs. 8 weeks ago in the Tour of Spain, again a superb ride to victory and again the shadow of scandal. Rumor had it that Delgado had bribed another rider. In that handsome Spanish head are stories yet to be told.
This is the first time ever in the Tour de France that a defending champion has started late in a prologue time trial. Delgado should have been here completely composed and ready, and instead he's off in a state of panic. He can't possibly recoup his time now, but let's not forget the mountains ahead can be great levelers for him.
As you could see, Pedro Delgado's Spanish supporters have not forsaken him on this day of mistake. But nor did they forsake him when the rumors of drugs began to circulate in last year's Tour. And they were delirious when he finally did win. And they will stick by his side again, only now hoping for one of the greatest comebacks in the history of the Tour de France. Pedro Delgado on this day finishes dead last. And now the speculation must be immediate. Just how did the almost unthinkable ever happen? The final standings in this 5-mile prologue to begin the Tour de France. Eric Breukink will wear the yellow jersey tomorrow. Greg LeMond with an encouraging 4th. And Pedro Delgado, 198. Eric Breukink's family has been building bicycles for 3 generations.